Hi, my name is Taylor Hamblin, and I used to teach social studies in South Dakota. Currently, I mentor future social studies teachers at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Fortunately, I was given an opportunity to create a series of resource videos that explain how I plan curriculum. In this video, I am excited to show you the C3 framework, concepts on inquiry, and how they can impact our curriculum to the benefit of students. After working with the materials that I'm going to share, you will be better prepared to revise social studies standards, create unique experiences for your students, and create lessons that will support our future citizenry. Like I said in the summary of this video, our job as social studies teachers, or those who teach social studies, is to ensure that our students are able to walk into society and be a good community member, which is a very difficult task. In order to do this, there are a few tools that we can use, and my intention for this video is to share some of those tools. These tools include standards that the state of South Dakota creates. It also includes something called the C3 framework, which is a set of national standards that was created by a collection of social studies professionals, teachers, government officials, interested people who want to ensure that social studies can help train these young people. So this is the C3 framework, and the 3 C's stand for college, career, and civic life. It is a set of national standards that really focus on inquiry, this idea of how do we get our students to inquire, how do we get them to question things and move a topic into an area that they're genuinely interested in. And I'm not going to go through the entire document. It's 110 pages long, and a lot of it's broken down into grade level and also discipline. So don't feel like you have to read the entire set. You really just need to focus on whatever discipline and grade level you have. And they have a little, beginning part right here where it helps you figure out exactly where you need to go. And I'm just going to kind of quickly go through the parts of it that I think for this video are really interesting. First of all, there are a bunch of different dimensions. There's 4, in fact, and they all kind of go over different parts of inquiry. So, for example, this very first part talks about developing questions and actually planning inquiries. And if you keep going down, you'll see that these different dimensions are also broken into different disciplines. So civics, economics, geography, and history. This is really helpful. It helps a teacher figure out exactly what they would like to zero in on. And since I'm a history nerd, I want to focus on that a lot. If we zoom in, we see under history that we could focus on something like historical sources and evidence, or we could focus on change, continuity, and context. These are all different things that if we really wanted to zero in on in a specific lesson, we could. And it's going to provide us language and ideas on how we could actually create activities to help get our students to a place where they're producing new knowledge, or they're committing some kind of actions, or doing some advocacy works. They're actually, what we call doing history. They are being engaged learners in our classrooms. Now, I understand for elementary school teachers, taking informed action might seem a little confusing because when the examples I just gave, when we think about it, it seems like things that adults would do, and high schoolers seems to be a stretch. But it's important to know that even young students, even as young as kindergarten, first grade, can take informed action. And obviously, it'll look a little different, but I think the C3 framework does a good job. So I'll just kind of scroll down instead of trying to explain it. And so what we have here are some examples of what it might look like. So here, construct an argument with reasons. Very simple idea. Can a student construct an argument? That's what we're looking for. If we keep scrolling down, there's even some better ones in my opinion. Where is it? Here we go. I really like this one. Identify and explain a range of local, regional, and global problems, and in some ways in which people are trying to address these problems. That could be as simple as a young person, in this case a second grader, being able to say that it is a problem that we have as much trash or debris in our rivers and oceans. And a lot of young people could easily see that in their own communities. And if they could, explain in their own words, like what either their local community, their school, or maybe even what they did, that would be a great example of taking informed action for young people. Now, I would like to compare the C3 framework to the South Dakota Social Studies standards to show how the current standards fit with the C3 framework. The intention of me doing this is to show you how you are already doing inquiry in the classroom. Before that, though, I want to quickly review where we can find the standards, in case we have any new teachers here. You are welcome to skip ahead already if you know where the standards are and you feel like you have a firm grasp of them. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at the South Dakota Social Studies standards. As you can see, we're on the South Dakota Department of Education website. It has all the standards for all the different disciplines. If we scroll down, we'll find Social Studies. I already clicked it earlier, so it already has its drop down showing us all of the different types of standards that we have available to us. So for example, we have, the traditional social studies standards. We also have a revised packet, which we'll look at in a minute. But we also have these civic standards too. So let's go ahead and click on these very first one. And here you are. You're now at the South Dakota Social Studies Content Standards. If you're a brand new teacher, these might not look very familiar, but if you're an experienced teacher, you're likely to have seen these before. We adopted them back in 2015, and actually, I'm filming this in 2021 right now. The upcoming conversation on how to change these standards is coming up this summer, so these will actually change here soon. And, if we scroll down past who helped and the overview, I'm going to kind of just quickly go down to our first set. Here we go, kindergarten. We kind of see exactly what these look like. The lower grades have different disciplines like history, civics, geography, economics. And my favorite thing to do is just hit Control F, and then I just type in, 8th grade. That's the grade I taught, and so I like to pop that in, and immediately brings me down to what I'm teaching. So now that I've described what the C3 framework is and where to find it, and also the South Dakota Social Studies standards, I really want to move into how to figure out exactly what to do with these standards and using it with the C3 framework. Fortunately, we're already doing quite a bit in our classrooms that could be considered inquiry. I'm just going to show you how to do it more formally and with intention. That way we're making sure that our students are actually, asking great questions. They're creating end products with the knowledge that you've taught them. So we're going to go ahead and go back into the C3 framework. I'm going to explain what it actually means to move students through an inquiry arc. So we're back in the C3 framework, and I'm going to go ahead and explain what's called the inquiry arc, which is really going to guide the rest of the videos and the workshops that we're going to do in the state of South Dakota. So if we scroll down, we'll see that we have a paragraph here that explains what the inquiry arc is. Unfortunately, they did us a favor and they color-coded in numbers, so we can kind of see exactly what the inquiry arc is. We have the first part, developing questions and planning inquiries. We have number 2, applying disciplinary concepts and tools. Number 3, evaluating sources and using evidence. Then finally, 4, communicating conclusions and taking informed actions. Now, we're going to really organize all of the videos around these 4, dimensions in the inquiry arc. That way you have a really solid idea of what each one actually means. Along with this paragraph, if we scroll down, we'll see that there's actually a table that even organizes it for us. So if you're a visual person, this might help, where we see that we do Dimension 1 first, developing those questions, and we move all the way into Dimension 2, 3, and then 4. So what I would like to do is kind of talk about how we actually do that with the current standards, because fortunately, you can do this with any set of standards. And in South Dakota, like I said earlier, they're going to be changing the standards soon, but you don't need to feel like that the current standards can't already do this. It can. The C3 framework's not meant to replace the standards. It's meant to build upon them and strengthen them. And as long as the standards have, really solid verbs like analyze, for example, or anything that the students have to do, any kind of critical thinking or action, the C3 framework will work. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the South Dakota standards real fast, and we're going to go ahead and find ourselves a standard. All right, so we're here in the South Dakota standards, and I was going to pick a standard real fast, and I saw this picture and illustration, and it's funny, you do something for years, and sometimes you don't even realize, something very simple in front of your face. And as I was looking at this illustration, I realized this is very much inspired by the C3 framework. So I'm assuming that the people who created the last set of standards were heavily inspired by it. And that just, completely strengthens the point I made earlier about how the C3 framework is already inspiring and working with our standards. And so it's not something extra, it's something that we're already doing. And why I say that is the 3 C's, college, career, and citizenship, there it is, civics, they're right here. So you got college, career, and citizenship. And we even see these, great words, and that really, to me, shows what we're trying to do with our social studies standards and discipline. It's about critical thinking and inquiry, those driving questions. It's about problem solving and communicating our ideas in that problem solving. To me, that's what social studies is all about. And I think our standards are already doing it, and hopefully they'll be even strengthened more so this year, especially along with the C3 framework. So real quick, it's a quick segue. All right, let's go ahead and find a standard then. Let's see, need Control F, and I'm going to type in grade 3. Oh, there it goes. It's already there. And we're going to use grade 3 because that's actually the grade I'm going to use for our example. So in the future videos, I'm going to be giving a lesson plan, like demonstration, and I'm going to be really focusing on the grade 3 standards. Thought that would be a good middle ground between all the elementary grades. And here we are. So if you're a practicing teacher, you've probably seen these before. If you're new, this might be your first time experiencing them, or one of the few times experiencing them. And here we have, all the grade 3 history. We see there's also grade 3 civics. Again, if you're new to the standards, a lot of times in elementary grades you have all 4 disciplines represented, whereas the older the student gets, they tend to focus on one of them. Although in 8th grade we had all 4 as well. And so the first thing I think it's really valuable to see how in some of the standards we already see how the C3 framework is impacting it. Like right here, generate questions. That's literally the first step of the C3 framework. So a lot of the standards are already being impacted by the C3 framework, and we're already starting to do these things, which is good news for us. It means that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We're already doing these things. But we're not going to pick that one since we're technically already doing something that the C3 is asking us to do. Let's go ahead and do this one, though, the very top one. Demonstrate knowledge of the obstacles and successes of the early settlers and in creating communities. So if you're a visual learner and you want to write that down so you could see them at the same time, you can feel free to do so. But we're going to take this standard, we're going to go ahead and go back and look and see exactly how, we might, quickly summarize it and put it through that inquiry arc. All right, so we're back here now, and we have our standard floating up here. I was able to make it where we can see our standard at the same time, and we're back here at our inquiry arc. And so we're going to talk really briefly. I'm going to summarize how we might take this standard and work it through this arc. So the very first thing, we need to develop questions and planning inquiries about it. And again, to read it out loud, the standard is demonstrate knowledge of the obstacles and successes of the early settlers and in creating communities. So I find it best to let students help you create the questions. It's going to really help figure out exactly what they're actually curious about, and that's a really great way to drive inquiries, so it doesn't feel like it's always up to you, and it doesn't feel like you're always the one in command. The students have a little bit of autonomy. Just some quick questions I can think of. Maybe the question is, what does it mean for a community to be successful? So that's a historical question that we could ask, but we could also carry that to today. So once we have our questions, we move into Dimension 2, and we need to pick our actual discipline. Now, we pulled this from history standards, and so, we could hopefully find some historical concepts to connect it to. But you can connect it to the others, like geography, for example. Maybe there's some geographical principles, I can't speak. There's some geographical principles that could potentially help us understand why certain communities are successful and others aren't. The fact that a community is near a river or a body of water might help students understand why that community might be successful, where a community built away from those things wasn't. You could even connect it to your local communities. Like, I teach in the Midwest. This video is for South Dakota teachers. Could be a really great way of explaining why certain towns are disappearing in South Dakota, and a lot of it's geographical. Dimension 3, evaluating sources and using evidence. We're going to talk a little bit about this more in a later video, and it can be kind of tough to find that information. But I'm going to help you find and gather those sources, and then also figure out which ones are good. For the younger grades, I think the biggest complication is finding things on the internet and then finding ways to actually make them digestible to young people. So we do need to find some information and sources. Kids should be able to see things, historical documents, primary sources, in order to answer the questions. And then finally, moving to Dimension 4, my favorite part, but honestly the toughest, is how do students actually take all what they learned from you, the concepts, how do they, as they've been answering the question, how do they take all that and actually do something with it? And that's what that idea of taking informed action is, which we mentioned earlier, but we'd want students to be able to take the standard that we're working with and do something. So, for example, maybe students find out, maybe they can argue why a community is successful while others aren't. And maybe they, can propose things to the school or the city. I think for young kids, that would be a really powerful experience if they could recommend to the city or the student council, what could be done in their, school community or town community or maybe even state. Now that I've shown you the C3 framework and a bit of the South Dakota standards, I wanted to show you one more resource that I think is going to be very helpful for planning out inquiries. And it's back here at the South Dakota Department of Education site. We're looking at social studies again. And if we actually open this up, which I already had, we look here when it says 2020 Revised Social Studies Unpacked Document. So we're going to open that up. And it's going to be documents that are going to be extremely helpful for every single grade. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And we see right here the documents are for every grade, like I said. And since we're going to be doing third grade for our examples, I'm going to open that up. And instead of describing it without showing it, I'm going to open this up. So this is what this is. It's really nice. It is a document that it gives you strategies, it's unpacked. It gives you as much information as you possibly want about each standard. So a lot of what we've been talking about, this idea of moving students to an inquiry arc, this document's really going to help you out. So we see here we have the standards. We have it in student-friendly language as well. And if we scroll down, we see some things that we're probably pretty familiar with as teachers. We have something, kind of simple like the factual knowledge that students need to know, what they can understand, but also what they can do. And these are all different things that you can use into your actual lesson plan. So feel free to steal from this. That's why teachers did it. I should also say another reason why I like this document is it was made by third grade teachers. Every single document was made by the grade level that practices it. So I think you're going to get some really relevant advice out of it. We have more OSEU connections, which we'll talk a little bit about that. But if you're nervous about applying outside standards, you'll have some connections there. We continue to scroll. We'll see we have some relevant skills that'll be useful. And finally, I'm going to take you down to the bottom, that taking informed action. So again, we see how the C3 framework is really impacting the standards already. And we see that we even have a demonstration of what we could potentially do for not only taking informed action, but here, civic engagement. So that a concept of social studies is meant to produce really great citizens. Here we have some activities that could potentially be used in order to do that. So wanted to show you that last resource, and now we're going to go ahead and move on to actually what we're going to be doing next during the workshop. Now, throughout these sets of videos, what I would like to do is show you my process. Now that I've shown you where to find the resources, I want to show you how I organize all these resources together. And then from that, how would I create, compelling questions? How would I write a really good end task or test? How would I create my rubrics? Even how would I create my warm-ups? And then connect all these different things together into what, I would call a unit plan. All right, so now we're at the unit plan, lesson plan, whatever you would like to call it. I call it a unit plan because it's meant to be broken into multiple parts, so we'll get more into that in future videos, but personally, I like to plan lessons, always thinking about how they connected to prior lessons and also future ones. So I tend to plan things out in chunks, that way I'm making sure things connect. Now, I'm not going to show you the entire thing yet because we're really going to cover that in other videos, but what I wanted to show you is what would be helpful to have ready now, for this first workshop, or if you're watching this video, you're not preparing for the workshop, you're watching it later. This is really the first step, and it's really figuring out, what topic do you want and which standards are you going to connect it to, and that's just going to really help you figure out exactly where to go from here. So having these things done would be great. If you're coming to the workshop, you're more than welcome to bring a real lesson plan, and if you have these standards already, great. If you want to connect them to some C3 framework things, you should. And that's really going to help us figure out how to best help you and just build from a good conversation. So looking at it now, we see that we have our South Dakota standards. We see we have a history standard and a geography standard. I did that on purpose. I thought it would be really beneficial for elementary school teachers to do a interdisciplinary type of lesson. I think you could easily do this with other disciplines too. So if you want to knock out an English language arts standard, depending on what the standard is in social studies, also science standards are fair game, and math. And so I think all those things can be brought in. And I might even, as these videos progress, change some of this additional standard stuff to reflect things that teachers would like to see. So I make these videos each week, so I can be pretty flexible with the folks who come to the workshops and any feedback I get. We see here then too that I have some C3 framework standards. We got geography here and history. And if we look closely, we might actually be even able to tell that a lot of these standards look pretty familiar, because if we look at our social studies standards in South Dakota, very similar things. Like we have a really strong verb in the beginning, like analyze. So that's what we would like students to do. And if we go back to the South Dakota standards, we see some of that same strong verbiage. Here in history, we compare life in specific historical time periods to life today. I mentioned that earlier in the video, that idea of maybe we can connect things that happened in the past to the present. Like, I mentioned how the community settlers, maybe their successful community can also be connected to today. I love doing things like that, and I think for younger students, it's a way of making things a lot less abstract and bringing it home and something that they could actually understand, and maybe even bring some artifacts from their own home and their own experiences. And then finally, we have an OSEU. I didn't touch on too much about the Ochetti-Sakowin standards. I include it because I think personally it's important because we have a really good set of standards that was made by the Ochetti-Sakowin community here in South Dakota. It's something that some teachers ask me, do I need to do this? No, I don't. Technically, I don't think you really need to do any standards work, but it really is a great way of making your curriculum stronger. Some principals and maybe the legislator would demand that you have to do the South Dakota social studies standards, but as teachers, we know that we hit them when we can, and especially younger teachers, a lot of times we don't even know about them or we don't reflect on them too much, and so to say that you're forced to do it, I think is a little silly because there's not there's no standards police out there. But it's something that makes curriculum planning, in my mind, a lot easier because it's a place to start from. It's something that we can constantly go back to when we're stuck. And what I'm going to do throughout these videos is show you that process. I'm going to show you probably me getting stuck. I haven't made this stuff yet, but as these videos progress, I'm going to be typing things and get stuck, and I'm going to go back to the standards, and you're going to get to see that. If you come to the workshops, you'll get to see it live action as I work with your materials too. But really, to me, that's what standards are. They're just a place that we can go to in order to figure out how to move forward. So, we're going to do this. The topic here is the 1918 influenza pandemic. I picked it because we just got through the COVID-19 pandemic, and I like to pick things that are relatable to the students. And so, I'm really going to try to drive home what students have experienced this year and what can we pull from that. So that is what we're going to do, and if you are looking for advice on what to do first, again, have some standards picked out, go to the C3 framework, pick some things, and if you want to, I really encourage just bring a lesson plan, because I would really enjoy working with actual real lesson plans that can be applied either to this year, even though the workshops are coming pretty late, or more feasibly next year. So I can't wait to see you next time. Please email me any questions. Talk to Melinda Johnson, who is the social studies specialist at the Department of Education in South Dakota. Ask her questions too, and please do not be shy. We are open books and would love to help you. Remember too, there are workshops that we'll be doing where we cover a lot of these topics. So this first workshop, we're really going to get into the nitty-gritty of how do you choose standards, where do you find the standards, and it would be best if you plan on attending those workshops if you bring lesson plans. Please bring stuff that you've already created, and if you don't have anything, if you're a brand new teacher, for example, ask around. Ask for lesson plans that you can bring. That way you could be in the practice. I would love that workshop to be a real workshop. So, until then, I hope to see many of you there. And again, if you have any questions, open book. I will see you next time. Take care.